Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. So, since last week, the updated forms were released on Monday/Tuesday. I think they came out late Monday night. They were on Monday on the 24th or the 25th. Some of them have been pushed back. So some of the things that we talked about last week, like the listing agreement, the updated buyer representation agreement, those have been delayed. They have not been released. So if you looked at zip forms, or you were looking to take a listing, or you started putting together a listing sometime after the 24th, it was still the regular listing agreement that we've been dealing with. The purchase agreement was updated only to change something. I'll show you. It was one change, and we'll go over that today. But the listing agreement, the buyer representation, and broker compensation, those were delayed. So I think they're probably waiting till we get a little closer to August. And they probably want to clarify some things, make sure that they have, everything in line, and it's, T's are crossed, I's are dotted. Everybody's ready to go. So last week we talked about a form that is still not here yet, and which is okay. But today, some of the stuff that we're going to go over is just brief stuff. These things have changed. These are the form releases that happened this week. So these are the ones you're going to see when you open your zip forms and you want to do something. This is the form you're going to be using. Okay. So we're just going to go over some of the minor changes that happened to these, and we'll have plenty of time for some questions or anything as we get to the end. So before I share my screen, anybody have anything they want to say or have a concern or question? No? Oh, I see a hand. Jasmine, go for it.
Hi, Kyle, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is the new rule how is it gonna affect our current listings on the market where we're disclosing the buyer's agent's commission?
Yeah, a good question. That'll happen in August. If you have a listing that's already active and is going to last through that change in August, we talked about last week, there is a disclosure and modification of existing listing that is now in your zip forms. And let's see, did I add it today? No, you know what? I'll put it up just real quick so you guys could see it. Where is that one? Modification. Disclosure modification of listing agreement. Let me add that. I'll show it to you first right now when I share, just so you guys can see it, because that did come out. That did come out in preparation for the changes, and because people are going to have listings, obviously, until that new listing agreement comes out, that those things need to be disclosed about the new compensation rules. So I'll show you guys that in a minute. But yes, there is a form for that.
Thank you, Kyle.
You're welcome. Jenny has a question. Okay, Jenny, let me find you and go ahead.
Hi, Kyle. I have a question in regards to a property in Southgate which has a pre-sale. We have a counter. It's a little off the topic, but I do need help on this. Where the seller is stating that it's only a 7-day inspection period, and they will not be providing the city clearance. So if the report comes in after the inspection, does the buyer still have opportunity to review it and still cancel if it's too much?
Yeah, the report, if you don't have the report within 7 days, right, which is what the seller's required to provide for you, all reports and disclosures, anytime you receive it, 5 days after that is the soonest that you can remove your investigation contingency, not your inspection, because you could do your professional home inspection without having that. But they can't require you to remove your investigation contingency until they've provided you with that report. So as long as you don't remove your investigation contingency, yeah, you'll still have a right to review that and back out if it's too expensive for you to, for your buyer to take on the responsibility of those city required repairs. Absolutely.
So even after the 7th day, if they are sending over, for example, like a removal for the inspection,
Well, but
we
then you
can
have
say
to,
no.
yeah, well, because you have to quote the contract and say, hey, this is part of the things that are required from the seller to provide to us in 7 days. You didn't provide it. Yes, we know you're not going to do the repairs, but you agreed to provide the report, which means you have to do it within the contractual obligations that are stated. We can't remove our contingencies without reviewing everything about the property. So until we receive that, we won't be removing our contingencies.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But just the investigation contingency, the loan, the appraisal, the home inspection, the insurance that we're going to talk about right now, those things aren't affected by that.
Correct.
Those aren't affected, just the investigations, period.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anybody else before I go ahead and share my screen? Okay, terrific. And so because Jasmine did have the question, and we're going to start with the disclosure and modification of the listing agreement. So that'll be the first thing you see when I share my screen. So let's go ahead and share that. There. And so you guys should be seeing right now on your screen disclosure and modification to listing agreement intended for use with an RLA revised 1223 or earlier. So the current listing agreement, because it hasn't been replaced yet, so any listing agreement that you've done in the last year basically is going to be affected by this, the disclosure modification of the listing agreement. So broker, seller, obviously that's pretty straightforward. It's brokerage, the seller's name, the listing agreement, the date the listing agreement was created, not the start date of the listing agreement, but the date it was created, the property address, and the start date and the end date, right? So your start date, your expiration date for your listing is what goes here. This is now going to disclose the changes to offers of compensation based on the NAR settlement. We talked about this form a little bit last week, I think, but it's okay to review it. I think that, there wasn't people that were on, and we want to make sure that this is clear, because those of you that have listings obviously are going to have, listings that are signed right now. You're going to have to do this prior to August 17th. Okay. So this is the disclosure that talks about what's happening, why the offers of compensation are changing, that it will be changing in August, as you can see here. The need to modify the listing agreement. Seller and broker agree it is mutually beneficial to modify the listing agreement to allow your property to expose to as many buyers as possible once the MLS changes to reflect the NAR settlement, right? So it's just saying, hey, we're going to modify it so it makes sure that we're with living under the terms of that new settlement. So what it says here in the modification of the agreement is broker agrees to notify seller once the MLS will no longer be able to be used to offer compensation to buyers brokers. Broker also agrees to notify seller of the method and means it will use to offer compensation to buyers brokers when that event occurs. Okay. Broker agrees to use reasonable efforts consistent with the NAR settlement to continue to market seller's property and offer compensation to buyers brokers to the maximum extent reasonably practicable. Seller agrees that the listing agreement term authorizing broker to cooperate with and compensate brokers participating through the MLS will no longer be in effect as of the date the MLS prohibits such offers of compensation. Seller also agrees that brokers' reasonable efforts in place of the MLS offer of compensation will satisfy brokers' obligations under the listing agreement. All of the terms of the listing agreement remain in full effect. So what it's saying is, hey, we're letting you know that you agreed to offer compensation to buyers brokers, right? That you paid enough for me to offer compensation through the MLS. Well, now the MLS is disappearing. Well, not disappearing, is removing offers of compensation. So we'll have to have alternative methods to offer compensation to buyers brokers in order to attract them and their buyers to purchase your listing. You're agreeing that the ways that I'm now telling you I'm going to offer that compensation lives up to the standard of the listing agreement that we had signed previously, and we're good. So that's what them signing this says. Like, we're good with that. What you told us is good, and we're ready to go. Okay? Any other questions about this disclosure? No? All right. Okay, so there you go, Jasmine. That's what has to happen with any current listings you have prior to August 17th. It says August 2024 here. We have the date of August 17th. That obviously could change. I don't know then when the new listing agreements and the things that were pushed back, I don't know when they're going to come. I know Darwin raised his hand, but since this was Jasmine's question, let me go to Jasmine first.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so let's say this is an example. We're offering right now 2.5% to the buyer's agent, right? And all of a sudden, the seller's aware of this new rule, and a new buyer comes in with the new rule in effect and says, "Hey, I want to get paid 3%." And has this does the seller have the right to say, "You know what? I don't want to pay 2.5% no more. I want to just pay 2%."
No, they don't. I mean, you can negotiate that with them. You can make a modification of the listing that states that the compensation that us as brokers are willing to are allowed to offer is 2% because they're reducing the total amount of compensation to us. That's included, right? Because you guys have to remember that at least what's happening here in this change is that sellers are clear that whatever compensation I pay you, I mean, they have a choice. It's either I can pay you a set amount of compensation, and from the money I am paying you, you offer to a buyer's broker, or I'm going to pay you 3% to be my agent, and I'll make a decision case by case of how much compensation I want to pay to the agents that are bringing buyers. Those are their two choices come August. Right now, they're in a contract where they've agreed to offer compensation. Now, if they want to try to renegotiate and you're open to that negotiation, then you can do that. But their contract that they've signed is binding. All it's stating right now is that the way we're going to offer that compensation is different based on how it was going to be when they originally agreed to this contract. So no, they can't all of a sudden say, well, now I'm not paying because it doesn't say. Well, sorry, your listing contract states that you are, and I've done this disclosure with you where you approved it. So no, you can't do that.
Great. Thank you, Kyle.
You're welcome. Okay, Darwin, go for it.
Let's say, boss, if you're in escrow, you still have to do that change?
If you're in escrow right now?
Yes.
This just has to be done prior to August 17th. So if you're going to close escrow between now and August 17th, you don't need to make any changes.
Oh, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, this just needs to be done prior to August 17th. That's all. All right. Any other questions before I move on to a different form? No? All right. Oh, here we go. All right. So let's look at the purchase agreement. The purchase agreement is not a huge change, but you guys need to know that it's in there. And especially for those of you guys as listing agents, right? And for buyer's agents, when you're writing an offer and we're writing these offers where we're reducing time periods, there's a new time period in here. So if you look at our contingency periods, there is a new section 3L4, which is 17-day contingency for getting insurance on the property. We all know that insurance has become a bit of a difficult process for buyers here in the state of California. So now it's a 17-day contingency period, which means if you remove that contingency on day 17 and you haven't locked in the insurance yet, and then you get to the end of your transaction and you can't get insurance or the insurance goes up too high, you could lose your deposit. And I think this is good that they put this in here like that, because what was happening was buyer's agents were, I don't want to say lazy, but we were a little bit lax in how we were pushing people on insurance. And we were kind of shoving it off onto the lender, like go find them insurance, or, hey, buyer's agent, you find whatever insurance you want. We weren't really putting a lot of pressure on them to do it. And then we were relying on the lenders to kind of finish that process because it was required for their home loan. So now making it an investigation, part of the lining up with the investigations and inspections, insurance is now a contingency. And we look at the contingency removal later, you'll see that on that contingency removal, and I may or may not show up, but the contingency removal has now added a box for checking off for removing your contingency of insurance. Okay, so that's really the only change to the RPA that happened on June 24th, because they had already prepared the changes for compensation and having a place to ask for compensation, months ago. Okay. So any questions about that, the insurance? No? Okay. So, like I said, the contingency removal also just added the insurance section here. Okay. There is now buyer's homeowner's insurance advisory. So it goes along with your purchase agreement to advise the buyers on the issues that are happening with insurance to go along with that, new contingency period. Yes, Alvaro, go ahead. Hello? Yeah.
Kyle, there it
Yes.
is. Regarding the insurance, do we as agents have any liability when recommending or referring our clients, let's say buyers, to an insurance company or agent?
No, I mean no more than any other vendor that you would refer them to. Now, again, we've talked about in the past with vendors, it's probably better to give them some choices than just say, "Hey, go use this person." Right? I mean, I know we always want to get our affiliates the business, but hey, if you got one or two insurance people or three insurance people, say, "Hey, I've worked with all three of these people. They're all decent people. Call them and get the best rate that you can for yourself." Right? That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I think what happens is when we don't give them choices and it's kind of just like, "Hey, I call my insurance. I need insurance for this person right now," and that was the only choice they had, right? Because we're scrambling to get a deal closed. I think that would increase your liability more than just a referral and letting them do their own, work.
So when you say increase, then we do have some liability?
Well, no. Well, let me rephrase it. It's not that you have liability. If something were to go wrong with the insurance or the cost was changed or was exorbitant or whatever, and we removed contingencies and it was just the only person, they're probably going to point a finger at you. But you don't really have any liability with any of your vendors. Okay? It's just, do I have some exposure where if something went wrong with my vendor, they could point at me because they didn't have a choice. I did all the work, right? Like the biggest issue would be more like a home inspector than an insurance company.
Correct.
Right? So I don't want to say that there's liability for you. I think there's some exposure if you're not giving them choice.
Okay. And does it exposure? So it's not something we should really worry about.
I wouldn't worry about it as long as again, just choice. Don't just say, "Here's the insurance person, you call them." Like I would say, "Hey, by the way, here's your choice on insurance. You can Google and look for homeowners insurance. You could whatever, maybe the car insurance company with has some bundling that you could do. So I would contact them. But here are two insurance agents that I know. You can call them and reach out to and find whatever works best for you." That's how you handle the insurance, and that's it. But you just got to put pressure on them. We need to get this done quickly, so I need you guys to be on it.
Right, similar to a home inspection, like you said. Then
similar to a home inspection, just like that.
All right.
And then for sure, there's no liability on that. Zero. And
all right, perfect.
If you really want to be like super protective of yourself, then you follow up that conversation with an email that sounds exactly the same way as that conversation. Where we spoke today about insurance. Here are the two people that I had numbers for, but don't forget we talked about calling your car insurance company and see if they can do bundling, or Google an insurance company and find the best rate for you, right? Like that kind of email
for sure.
To back it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So, all right. So this, again, just a disclosure about the insurance issues that are happening in the state of California. Okay. The cancellation of contract. It added this verbiage here. Sign in this section solely for cancellation of contract. Proceed to page 2 for disposition of deposit and cancellation of escrow. So the thing is that what the part that we miss about cancellations, about the cancellation form, is that it's really two separate things that it's doing. One is canceling the contract. So for example, if I were to say, check this box for as permitted by good faith exercise in, what is it, 3L3, right? That's the investigations, right? And I'll just put this so it looks better, right? So I'm canceling because of 3L3, right? I'm the buyer, okay? And I have the right to cancel, okay? And I sign here as buyer. and I send this to seller, and on here, let's say that I ask for the seller to remove to release the deposit to me, and I sign as buyer on here. If you notice on the top section, it only requires the person canceling the contract to sign. So because if I have the right to cancel, this effectively cancels our real estate contract. So I don't have contract with you as buyer and seller any longer. What we haven't canceled because we need to both sign is the escrow, which is a separate entity from the transaction. Okay, so my transaction is canceled. I just haven't canceled the escrow. And that's what gives people the ability to receive and accept offers subject to cancellation of previous escrow. You can accept an offer, you could get everything going, you're just subject to that escrow canceling, that's it. So just know that these are accomplishing two separate things. Go ahead, Jesus.
Kyle, so let me ask you, if I open an escrow and no EMD is given, do we have to cancel the escrow still after the cancellation?
Yeah, and it says down here, if you look at it, in the cancellation of escrow, it says there is no deposit in escrow, each party to pay their own unpaid contractual fees or costs, if any, right? So, I mean, for the most part, we've given the information to escrow for them to start their process prior to the buyer having to put the deposit in, right? Because escrow's got to have something ready to accept the deposit. So generally, escrows won't require an additional signing of a cancellation from escrow if there is no deposit. I would say that the majority of them don't require any additional instructions to be signed because escrow instructions weren't signed yet anyway. So yeah, you still have to get this signed by both parties. Just that's how it works. But there's no deposit in escrow. It's canceled, right? There's nothing yet you're waiting on any longer. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. We're not going to go over that. Let's go into here. The contingency, I think they just added some verbiage that it doesn't really change the, oh no, it's this part down here, the notice to buyer contingencies to provide and remove funds. That's it, just added, so you don't need to do a notice to perform. The real estate transfer disclosure. Okay, so aside from law changes, right, where we have the practice change with how we handle compensation, there is a new law coming in July 17th. I think it's July 17th. Well, it's July of this year, so it's coming soon. It might be July 1st. The seller is required to disclose the name of the contractor and a detailed list of all the work done over $500 if they've owned the property for less than 18 months, right? For 18 months or less, they've owned the property, they're selling it. In their disclosure, they don't not only do they have to disclose that there were changes, that they made changes to the property, but they have to disclose the name and contact information of the contractor on anything over $500 and a detailed list of what those repairs were. Now, we've always had to disclose repairs, right? Room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs not in compliance with building codes, or room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs made without necessary permits. We've always had to disclose that stuff. But now it says if transfer acquired the property within 18 months of accepting an offer to sell it, transfers shall make additional disclosures regarding the room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs on a seller property questionnaire. So it's just putting that note there that's telling you on a seller's property questionnaire, we're going to have to make that disclosure. And that's where this is. Right here, we will go to this, repairs and alterations, and where did the little note go? Right here. So if you look here, whether you purchase the property within 18 months of accepting an offer to sell it, yes or no, right? So you have to disclose that. If yes, have any room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs, collectively improvements, been performed by a contractor while you have owned the property? Yes or no? If yes, seller shall provide an explanation below, a list of such improvements, and the name and contact information for each contractor who performs services of $500 or more. If yes to F1, seller shall provide an explanation below, a list of those improvements for which seller has obtained permits, and seller shall attach copies of those permits to this SPQ. And for those improvements for which seller does not have a permit, seller shall include a statement identifying those improvements and that the seller was not provided permits by a third party making the improvement, and the contact information for such third parties for whom the buyer may obtain these permits. Okay. So it just increased what has to be disclosed for people who have owned the property for 18 months or less. That's it. Okay. That's coming in July. That's happening. That is not changing. That is not going to move. That is happening. Okay. And that's why they put this in to your disclosure. So just be prepared for that and have those conversations with the people that you know are those people that have to disclose this, which are the flippers, right? The investors. Those are the people that are going to do it. So you have to have them prepared for those disclosures. And look, this one's saying if you had a contractor. Now, if they didn't hire a contractor to do it, doesn't mean they have to not disclose the repairs. They still have to disclose the repairs, and they have to disclose if they're unpermitted. Right? That's always been required. I just don't think that most of those investors were doing it, but that's always been required. So you're going to have to push that with them anyway, is that they're going to have to make this disclosure. Okay? So any questions? Wow, I'm surprised. I'm surprised we had no questions. So again, remember we talked about that, the listing agreement. That update has been pushed back, okay? That's been delayed. So just continue to do the listing agreement as you have. The disclosure and modification of listing agreement exists. Just make sure that is done with any listings that you have prior to the 17th of August. The other form that was, there is the... Where is that disclosure amount of? Okay. If you guys have a buyer representation agreement with anybody that is currently signed, like if you've started that process, and I know there's a couple agents that have started that process, again, same thing. This is a change to how compensation is paid. So there's a disclosure and modification to a buyer representation agreement, because the new BRBC, buyer representation of broker compensation, the updated one has been pushed back, right? So there is not a new one. It is right now still currently the BRBC that we're using. So if you have one of those signed that is going to extend through August 17th, you've got to make sure that you also have this signed before that happens, okay? Before August comes around and the compensation rules change, okay? Any questions? Go ahead, Jesus.
Yes, Kyle. So now it's a fact that is going to be in effect August 17th.
That
No more
was the
pushbacks.
that was the last thing that NAR stated, was that it was August 17th.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else have any? I mean, this went quick. I think it was just more because they reduced the amount of forms that were updated, and so I just wanted to finish what we didn't finish last week. So this is a perfect opportunity for you guys to be able to ask any questions that you might have, because we have a little bit of time. So if any of you guys have something that you wanted to discuss, I'm open. You can always count on Jesus. Go ahead.
Thank you. I couldn't fail. So just because we had a discussion, you and I, about 20 minutes ago in regards to BRBC, where my client is not willing to pay me commission on the uplegs coming up, and I figure, well, I'm gonna risk it and hopefully the agents pay for it.
Yeah.
But she wants it in writing to say that she's not gonna pay me. So I say,
Right.
okay, let's put $1. However, by doing that, then even though the agents are offering 2 or 3%, because I have that written down, they won't pay me the 2%. Correct?
Well, yeah. So the discussion that Jesus and I had earlier was that if come August 17th, remember this is still a month and a half away, right? So the chances of you being able to get her into, I mean, I know you have a longer escrow with her, it's a 60-day escrow and all those things. Here's the problem. If your buyer is concerned that they don't have money to be able to pay you, and that's why they don't want to put anything in writing on the buyer representation agreement, the problem is I can't even show you properties without a buyer representation agreement. Come August, not right now. I can't even show you properties. And beyond that, whatever we negotiate as compensation in that buyer representation, broker compensation, we're going to call it the BRBC from now on because it's really long. Whatever we negotiate as far as compensation in that BRBC is the maximum amount of compensation I can receive from anybody, not just from you, buyer, but from anybody. So if I find you a home and the listing agent says, hey, I really need to sell this, I'm going to pay you 3% if we bring your buyers. But my buyer was so hesitant to negotiate with me, or I couldn't sell my buyer on what my value was, they only wanted to pay me 1.5%. That's all I can make, even if the listing agent is willing to pay me 3%. If we call a listing and the listing agent says, hey, listen, the seller's willing to pay 3% commission. They're not paying it to me, but they're willing to pay to a buyer's agent that brings a full price offer. So if you write a full price offer and you ask for 3%, you can get it. Unfortunately, if I've only negotiated 1.5% with my buyer, I can't get that 3%. So you have to understand that whatever you negotiate with your buyer is the maximum you can get. Now, I can do a modification of that buyer representation, right? The BRBC. I can modify it because just like a modification of a listing, how the compensation works, I can do a modification of that BRBC, but my buyer's got to be willing to sign that modification. So it's one of those things that ultimately, you know, your negotiation abilities with your buyers are going to affect the amount of compensation you may be able to receive in the future based on this change in compensation. So that's why I told Jesus is you can't put anything in writing that says I'm getting paid 0, because then that's what you get paid. You can't get paid more than that. Jesus, you have your hand up again. Go ahead.
What if I'm not very good agent? I forget to send the BRBC when I present my offer. I just forgot to do it.
Well, okay, so the BRBC is not necessarily that you're going to send it with all your offers. That's not it. Unless you're in your offer, you're requesting for the seller to pay that compensation, you don't necessarily have to provide it. You do have to provide it to escrow. So, you know, they're going to have to follow the laws that say, hey, the maximum compensation is X, we can't pay you Y, right?
So we don't have to send it with the RPA?
You don't have to send it with the RPA. You do need to make it clear that your compensation is what your compensation is, though. There's going to be an updated CBC also, right? Based on compensation. There's going to be an updated CBC that got pushed back too. So my assumption is what's going to happen is those CBCs, because it's not going to have any mention of the MLS, it's just going to be negotiated based on my BRBC and based on what's being offered. You're going to negotiate there if the listing agent is paying that compensation. If the seller's paying the compensation, you do have to provide it because you have to put it in the offer. So it's going to depend on how you're negotiating the compensation, whether or not you have to provide it with the offer. Okay? All right, Tina, yes, go ahead.
Could a addendum between you and your buyer work with putting 0 in the BRC, and then if in lieu the addendum states that, hey, if the other agent, if they're offering a compensation, they're paying me for it? Get what I'm
Yes and no. That's a weird, like, it's a little bit of a gray. So you're saying, like, you know what? Let's, as a matter of fact, let's look up right now. Let me
like
do
we
this.
put 0 in on that BRC, but the agreement between me and my client states that the other, the other party is going to pay whatever they're paying, and that won't affect that BRC.
Well, okay. So you could, for example, and let me go back to sharing something with you guys right now. Just
And then
since we're-
obviously that that modification thing.
Yeah. So what you see right here is you could do pursuant to a compensation schedule. The problem is that the problem is this. Okay. So even if you put 0, but I can get, it doesn't work that way. What you could say in there to maybe what you could do is you could put, like, hey, our compensation schedule is this. You're paying me 2%. Okay. Buyer agrees to pay me 2%. Listing agent will only show buyer properties that are offering compensation to buyer's agent, right? Okay. Any compensation that's being offered to buyer's agent, buyer will modify this buyer representation agreement to mirror that compensation. You could do maybe something like that.
In an addendum.
Well, it would have to be on an addendum because it's okay. You'd have to write that out on a, but you would check this box for the compensation schedule. The problem is that, like, for Jesus, and he and I discussed this, his buyer wants to see 0. Like, I don't want to see I'm paying something, but it always has to start with the buyer is going to pay you something. Whatever the terms of the buyer paying it or how you're going to work within that, it has to show the buyer's paying you some compensation in order for you to get compensated.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Well, then wouldn't an addendum saying, hey, this is showing that you're paying me this much, but in the addendum agreement between you and I, you're really not paying me anything, and the seller side is.
Yeah, but you'd have to, I mean, it'd have to be super clear. Like, I'm only showing you properties that are negotiating, that are going to pay compensation. If you want a property that is not going to compensate the buyer's agent, I can't represent you on that property. Like, those are the kind of things are like, you're going to have to it's going to have to kind of cover every base, which I think will be difficult. And maybe they'll have some between now and August when this goes into effect. Maybe they'll have something that's a little clearer on, hey, if a buyer's willing to negotiate or only wants to see properties where compensation is being offered by a third party, maybe they'll have something like that. I don't know. I can't say. But as of right now, that might be the only way. And I'm still like everybody else, I'm still kind of just trying to figure out, okay, contractually, how can we make it work where we're not violating any of the rules and the changes, but we're still being able to be a little flexible in compensation. And so I can't even tell you with 100% that that's going to be super enforceable.
Got it. Just asking. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, Jasmine, go ahead.
Kyle, so let's say the seller decides, okay, yeah, I'll pay the buyer's agent 2.5, and then we have they verbally call us and say, hey, and we tell them, yeah, the seller is going to pay 2.5. We verbally tell them on the phone, then the buyer's agent sneakily submits a 2.75 buyer's compensation. Can we just say counter that and say, no, the seller's only paying 2.5? We're willing to pay that buyer, but we're just going to counter, and that's it. End of question.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So we'll be able to counter those.
Everything is now negotiated in the contract. It is the exact opposite of how it used to be, where it was just negotiated outside with the CBC and what the MLS said. No, now everything is in the contract. Everything. All right, Chris, go ahead. I know you typed in chat earlier that you had a question, so go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know how to use it. I just figured out the hand. Yeah. So for this buyer's commission, I guess a couple questions. One, does the agent can still put remarks in the MLS about the compensation?
No.
Okay. So then it's the Wild West. Nobody knows what they're going to get going into a transaction until the offer is presented, or how do you know?
Well, right now, the 100% only legal sure way is that agents on their personal websites can list the compensation that's going to be offered, whether it's by them or by the seller.
So can you put a link to the website in the agent remarks or the notes on the MLS?
Good question. I don't think so. I don't think you can do that right now, so I doubt you'll be able to do that then.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's just going to be that it's going to be communication, period, end of story. It's going to be, hey, I'm showing your property on Saturday. Are you guys willing to pay any compensation? It's going to be a conversation. It's the majority of the compensation stuff is going to be conversations. And we talked about this months ago when it first came through. There may be times where, you know, I call Chris and I'm like, Chris, hey, I got this terrific buyer. You and I have done business together. Is there any compensation? And you're like, hey, listen, I know your buyers. I know they're fantastic. Let me go to my seller. And you can go to your seller and say, listen, Mr. Seller, I know our job is we want to close this deal. Kyle and his buyers are top notch. They're solid. I know that if we put it in escrow, it's going to close. Is it okay if we pay him 3%? And yeah, okay, sure, terrific. Yeah, go ahead, pay him because I want to close. But, you know, John Smith calls Chris and goes, Chris, we did a deal before. And you're like, oh, this guy is a pain in the ass. Hey, Mr. Seller, we're going to get an offer from this guy. It's going to be full price, but he's really hard to work with. I'm going to have to do a lot of work. I say we only offer him 2% in compensation. Okay, great, do it. Absolutely, that's how it can work. So it's just going to be it's a lot of having conversations with the listing agent, kind of pleading your case, adding on the cost of the compensation on top of the offer, as long as you think the property is going to appraise or that your buyers have the ability to purchase that. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of things that we can do to fit that compensation in. Did you have another question, Chris? I said.
So yeah, no, it's okay. I just cut off my Wi-Fi. Can we get commissioned from the lender's pool and anybody else in the transaction, but mainly the lenders, because I think they're making the most? Is there a way that we can do some?
Nope, that's illegal.
Can the lender credit the buyer back, and then the buyer? Well, can the lender credit the buyer, and then the buyer can do whatever they want?
No. I mean, they could credit them for closing costs, but if the buyer then wants to pay compensation because they don't have to pay the closing costs, yeah, but there's still going to be a limit on the amount of that. But lenders can't pay compensation. But here's the thing. This is what I'm going to tell you guys right now, and this is not a knock on you, Chris. Stop stealing from your lenders, by the way. Just go do your job. Show your value to your buyers, get your buyer to commit or negotiate with sellers. I don't think we should be taking the money out of the pockets of our lenders. I don't care how much money they make, they work hard for it. And I have a problem with that. I do. I hate when agents go to their lenders with their hands out and say, I need you to pay for something. I think it's great when the buyer says, hey, I need help. And the lender goes, I know we can't get it from somewhere else. I'll throw it in and we'll get it done. But when agents start asking lenders for money, that's garbage. So, I mean, there's not a knock on you, Chris. That's my feeling on it. I feel like agents are trying to be bloodsuckers to lenders, and I don't like it.
Yeah, well, I think that the problem is that I see is that there's no risk to the lender. So the agent, you know, in the case that they might be referring the business, you know, you're kind of a team, and then like, you know, as the agent, you don't know what you're going to get. That's what it really sounds like. You do not know what you're going to get, even when you present the offer. And I've been testing this with my listings already. Sadly to say, I've already been testing it, and I put $1 on the buy side and buyer to request agents, you know, buyer's agent compensation. I'm already practicing it, and we gave 2% on the buy side, but you know, I want to see how the grind was, to be honest with you. And he didn't really, the buyer's agent didn't really like it. You know, and I was cool about it, but I did grind them. And then I did grind the client actually to come up in commission. So it was actually a good opportunity to lift up the commission, say, hey, well, he presented a really strong offer. So it could be a good thing too, right? That, well, hey, it's a strong offer. We're going to move, you know, we're going to drive the sales price. And then he drove up the price even more to get another $2,000. But I told the client, we're going to give that to him, you know, that because the client's basically going to pay for it in the sales price. Yeah. So it was truly interesting.
Yeah,
to say
but
the
that's
least.
but again, the right way to do it. You guys negotiated. You negotiated between the two
Yep, that's
parties,
true.
the buyer and the seller, and they got the deal done to something that made sense for everybody. They didn't go to, hey, title, give me this credit on this, lender, give me this money for this so my agent
Yep.
can get paid. I just,
Yep.
I don't like that we bleed our
That's true.
affiliates dry to get money. I think that's not the right way to do business. But it's good. You're learning how to negotiate this, and I think that's great.
Yep.
All right, let's go to Eric.
Thank you.
What's up, Eric?
Hi, Kyle. I have a question. So after August, if we go to like a listing presentation, I was still going to be able to negotiate our commission at 6% or higher.
You can negotiate whatever you can negotiate.
Okay.
Whatever you're capable of selling your value at,
Yeah.
absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
You can negotiate how much they're going to pay you. You can negotiate how much they're going to pay you if you double in. You can negotiate how much they're going to pay if you offer stuff out. You can negotiate all that stuff still. That's
Good.
still there. Like that didn't disappear. So
Okay.
if you could sell a seller on, hey, I'm worth 7%, and this is why I'm worth 7, and what I'm going to do with the 7 is X, Y, and Z, and part of that 7 is going to be 2% to a buyer's agent, and that's how we're going to do it. And if I double in it instead of the 7, I'm going to only charge you 6. You can do all of that in the new listing agreement, which is really cool. I kind of like that. All of that stuff is negotiable in there, and it's separated. So it makes it a lot easier to negotiate that with the sellers and to have that conversation on how it works and how it's being split up and, you know, all of those things. So, yeah, absolutely. If you have the ability to prove your value and charge more than 6, more power to you. Go for it.
Fantastic. So, and we're still going to be obligated, like saying, the reason I'm going to charge you at 6% is because I'm going to share 2% with that selling agent. Are we going to be forcible to saying those disclose what are you going to do with that whole commission? Or
Yes, that's going to be a lot clearer what you're doing with the commission. It's going to be in the listing. The listing agreement is now going to be, compensation is going to be broken up by what you're getting paid, what you're getting paid if you double in, and what is going to be offered out. They're going to be 3 separate items.
Oh, okay.
So it's not going to be like, here, it's 6%, and then I'm doing X like it is now. Like right now, if you want 6, you write 6 in the top, and then you write at the bottom 2% being offered out. You have to disclose that. In this one, it's going to say, you're paying me 3 for this part of my job, which is to represent you as seller. Then, if we're going to offer something out, you're going to give me extra compensation to offer something to a buyer's agent. Here's that amount that you're going to pay me for that. And if I am the one who represents both, it's either by default a combination of those two, or it's this amount, right? Something else. You have a choice. So it's really 3 separate items. It's not all mixed together any longer.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, it'll be easier. But if you have the ability to do it, man, hey, I'd be proud of anybody that came and told me, hey, I got a 7 or 8% commission. It'd be fantastic. Great job.
Good. Thank you, Kyle.
You're welcome. All right, so let's we're gonna finish a little bit early. Thank you guys for being here. Obviously, no class next week since we'll be celebrating Independence Day. If you guys need anything, you know where to get me. This video will be on YouTube later today. The last week's is already up there. If you guys want to go back, all the videos are there. If you want to review anything, please share all those videos, share, subscribe, do all that great stuff. Thank you guys for being here. I really, really appreciate it. Have a fantastic day and be productive.